Welcome viewers around the globe to this special edition of the Newsmakers on TRT World. I'm Andrea Sankey and we are live from Islamabad, where Pakistanis have finally cast their votes in what had been a much demanded general election following the April 2022 ouster of Prime Minister Imran Khan. But today is not the election most voters wanted. This election has been scarred by a number of factors, not least the suspension of mobile and internet services, which many voters count on to get to the polls and to know where they're voting, and then, of course, to share information during and after they cast their ballots. Now, voter apathy was another serious issue, with some estimates at just 40% turnout. And what we're seeing so far as results are concerned, is coming as quite a surprise, I'll put it that way. It was widely predicted that the PLMN's Nawaz Sharif, Pakistan's so-called political comeback king, would claim a victory and form a working coalition with the PPP's Bilawal Bhutto in second place. But instead, what we're hearing from local sources right now is that the independent candidates on the ballot representing Imran Khan's PTI party have a lead. Now, most believe the PTI wouldn't stand much of a chance in this vote as, one, their well-recognized party symbol, the cricket bat, had been omitted from the ballot papers, and that matters a lot in a country where about 40% of the population is not literate. And two, the imprisonment of PTI party leader, of course, Imran Khan, who was just sentenced to 14 years in prison, with many of his party's top-tier colleagues also in jail or in hiding over what they say are all politically motivated charges to keep them out of the political forum. Well, we'll be discussing what we can about the results in just a minute, but first, here's a look at how today's election unfolded.
Pakistanis voted in pivotal elections, which were marred by violence and political polarization. Millions headed to the polls to choose the country's next prime minister and legislatures. Other potential voters, amounting to millions, stayed away from the polls, largely because of a lack of hope for any real change and the absence of former Prime Minister Imran Khan on the ballot. Khan and his wife were each recently jailed for 7 years by a Pakistani court, which ruled that their 7-year marriage was un-Islamic and illegal. He was ousted in a no-confidence vote in 2022 after falling out with the country's powerful military. Khan launched a campaign for early elections, and despite elections being eventually called, this wasn't the vote his supporters wanted. The PTI leader was barred from running and has been in jail since August last year, serving a 3-year sentence for corruption. His arrest last year sparked violent protests. Leading up to the vote, he was sentenced in 2 separate cases to 10 years for leaking state secrets and 14 years for selling gifts received during his premiership. That and the alleged suppression of PTI politicians raised accusations of pre-election rigging.
We're disturbed, therefore, by the pattern of harassment, arrests and prolonged detentions of leaders of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, the PTI, and their supporters, which has continued during the election period. All eligible parties must be able to compete fairly.
And the nationwide mobile and internet blackout on the election day added more to that concern. Digital rights group NetBlock says the suspension hurts the fairness of the vote.
They were worried that everything will run on social media, so they have shut down the networks. All of us are irritated because of this, as well as the chaos in the polling booths.
Yet the authorities said they took the measure to maintain law and order. 2 attacks on election offices in Balochistan province killed at least 26 people just a day before the polls. Thousands of security personnel were deployed and borders were shut to safeguard the vote. But the militant attacks on polling stations killed several people, highlighting the deteriorating security situation in the country.
There are security worries, of course. Why wouldn't there be? Due to what happened in Pishin and other districts yesterday, the blasts, things that happened the day before, there's worry. But we came out to vote for our future and hope for the best.
So, hope for the best.
The economic crisis was also on the voters' minds, with around 30% inflation and 40% of the population living under the poverty line. Many Pakistanis hardly make ends meet.
The economic situation is so bad that we can't survive. In every household, every person, including children, are earning money, but still their financial situation is very bad. If we talk about electricity bills, gas bills, water bills, it's way beyond our thinking.
So the new government will have a lot to face as Pakistanis desperately need stability, security, economic relief, and a better standard of living.
Almost 6 hours after the polls have closed, results are still, of course, coming in. It's very unclear as to what exactly is emerging, but we'll be discussing what we've heard so far, as well as, of course, the lead-up, the very controversial lead-up, I should say, to this vote, and what might be to come on this very fresh winter evening here in Islamabad, Pakistan. Let me introduce my panelist. Joining me here is Mudassir Rizvi. He is the CEO of the Trust for Democratic Education and Accountability at the Free and Fair Elections Network. Abid Suleri is Executive Director and Senior Research Fellow at the Sustainable Development Policy Institute, and Ammar Rashid is a researcher and writer specializing in politics, development, and public policy. Thanks all so much for being with me. Mudassir, I'll just start with you. I mean, this has been a highly unusual election, to say the least, not just today's voting, but this entire year and a half, 2 years lead up to this vote.
Well, it's a very different elections that we have seen. I'm calling it a closure of 2 years of a very long dragged out election campaign. The election campaign started when the former Prime Minister Imran Khan alleged there's a conspiracy to oust his government, and the election campaign started then. And then there was constant polarization. We had seen so many ups and downs. We had seen PTI allegedly attacking military installations, and all that is part of this election campaign. Now we have these elections. Like you said, scarred by many allegations of level playing field not being available to all. It's not just PTI. The religious parties in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa bordering Afghanistan were not being able to campaign because some militant groups were not allowing them to campaign. So it's not just the role of establishment that was coming, because there were non-state actors which were also creating a situation where many political parties were not being able to campaign. Now we had the election, and this is much needed election. It's a closure. People were exhausted. There was constant polarization. There's a lot of communal stress. And today we have finally, we have seen election. The good thing is all political parties, despite all the issues, contested elections. Unlike many previous elections when political parties alleged foul and boycotted the elections, this augurs well for Pakistani democracy. All political parties, despite issues, were in the run. Even PTI, which was deprived of its electoral symbol, the bat, they even contested. And now we are seeing many of the supported candidates are leading in many electoral races. So this is one good sign that nobody boycotted. 111 parties were allotted symbols, and it's one of the most contested elections in Pakistan, right, despite all the issues.
So you're describing an upside, I guess, but Abid, I mean, as he also says, this is closure, but we might see a completely inconclusive result here. So what do you make of this vote? Was it anything you were expecting?
Yes, I think I can see a couple of positive things coming out of it. The first, voters' trust in the whole process. So despite all odds, they came to vote, and the trend so far, although it's too early to say anything, only around 10% of the results. But when we look at independents and the way they are leading in some of the very highly contested constituencies, that somehow shows that the voters, they had this trust in the whole electoral process. They came and they knew that their vote can make a difference, and they did vote for it. Similarly, one can see People's Party, after a long period of time, again active in Punjab. They had almost lost hope in Punjab, but Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, I'll give him credit that he actually mobilized a campaign in Punjab, and he did well in the campaign at least. Now, what would happen after once the government is formed? The first thing that the government would have to do is to engage with the IMF for the closure of the current standby agreement, which helped us avoid a default, and then negotiate a new IMF program. That would be a quite tough program, especially when it comes to energy and other tariff. And that's where the political consensus is required.
I'll tell you what, I want to talk about the economy, of course, because that was absolutely key in bringing voters to the polls today. But before we go too far, let me get Amar's take on the lead up and what we saw unfold earlier this afternoon, especially. You talk about the Pakistani voters electorate coming out. If we're looking at a turnout of 40%, which some say might be optimistic, are you satisfied with that? Do you think Pakistanis are active in their democracy to produce a result that should be respected?
Yeah, so in my interaction with voters over the past few weeks, I witnessed two things. One was a deep cynicism with the entire electoral process. A lot of voters felt that there was a pre-decided outcome, that there were certain parties, like the PMLN specifically, which was favored to win, even though their most recent stint in a coalition government produced possibly one of the worst economic crises in Pakistani history, with inflation being at 30% for most of last year. And so there was a cynicism about the entire engineering and the build-up to the election. But at the same time, I also saw a lot of voters, especially young voters, who were nonetheless convinced they were going to vote and they were going to have their voices heard. And a lot of people did feel that that was very important. I feel like it's a bit early to say how much the turnout was. It might be in the 40s, perhaps in the 50s. But I do believe that the voters of the PTI, the party that was most targeted in terms of the pre-election atmosphere, in terms of their symbol being taken away, their leadership being under arrest, and them really having to feel like a new set of candidates in many different areas. I feel like because of the repression that the party faced, I think their voters were possibly the ones that may have been most motivated to actually come out on election day.
Talk a little bit more, though, about the youth vote. I mean, some of the statistics are they're so impressive because more than 50%, if I'm not mistaken, of the electorate is actually under 35 years of age, and 10.7 or so million new voters were registered this year, so obviously between 18 and 25. That's a huge contingent. Do you think the more kind of traditional leadership in the PMLN and the PPP, for example, knew how to court those young voters?
No, I definitely think there is a disconnect between the more traditional parties and the younger part of the electorate. I think a lot of that has to do with simply the leadership of these parties. Most of them are octogenarians, or at least there's very few in their leadership under 40. I mean, the chairman of the Pakistan People's Party, of course, Bilawal, is a relatively young leader, the youngest foreign minister in Pakistan's history. But if you look at the overall structure, the leadership structure of these parties, there's a certain dynasticism that's still very embedded within them. The parties aren't particularly democratic, and you could argue that very few parties in Pakistan are. But there is a certain culture and a public perception of them mostly rewarding their own family members and extended clans. So even if it's young politicians, a handful of young politicians emerging in leadership positions in their party, they will be from the same families that have been contesting for a long time. And I think young people are definitely hungry for change, for more representation. And I feel like the one party, at least in Punjab and KP, that a lot of young voters felt that they did identify with was Imran Khan's PTI, of course, which was forced to run as, and the candidates of which were forced to run as independents.
So Mudassir, I mean, picking up on that dynasticism as it was described, I mean, yeah, voters are coming out, the voters that do bother to come out, half at best, are seeing the same names, the same families that they've seen for decades now. I mean, this will be, as we said, if he wins Nawaz Sharif's fourth term in 34 years. I mean, his own brother just served once Imran Khan was ousted. How can you keep a democracy engaged when this is endless cycle of family dynasties and the same faces they've seen that have brought very minimal change at best to Pakistan?
Well, in a democracy, political parties form a cornerstone to any democracy. And political party structures are extremely weak in Pakistan. Be it PTI, be it People's Party, be it PMLN, They at best exist at a very macro level, and they do not organize at the grassroots, at the communal level. And the new leadership doesn't come up. And then their families, they continue to dominate. But the important thing is people continue to vote for them. And if the democratic process continues, if we continue to have periodic elections, if people continue to elect new governments at a regular periodicity, probably new leadership will come in, the proper political parties will organize. We need to give democracy a chance. It's an evolving process. We are a very struggling democracy, and the democracy evolving. What we had seen 10 years ago has changed quite a lot. For example, people are openly talking about the role of Pakistani military in politics. We openly discuss it. It's being discussed in social. 10 years ago, we were not able to discuss it. So this openness is also strengthening democracy. People are talking about dynasties, and I think there is a talk within political parties as well. But we cannot wish them away because people elect them, people like them, and people love them as well, whoever they are. But we need to respect people's choices. We cannot wish, or because we don't like certain people, we cannot wish them away. It has to be democracy, it has to be elections, and it has to be constant, and then a change would come.
Fair enough. And I mean, as we're saying, as you're saying right now, look how we are openly discussing. I'm allowed to come here as a journalist and ask these very blunt questions to three Pakistani panelists.
If I could just add something on the dynasticism question, I completely agree with Mubashir that, I mean, these politicians do have popular support. They have their own voters. No one can deny them their support that does exist. At the same time, these parties, with the help of the establishment, have also kept in place barriers to politics that don't let new leadership emerge. Whether you talk about internal democracy within their parties, whether you talk about local governments, most of these parties have not really instituted local governments in Pakistan. We're still without them in the 21st century. They've kept student unions banned, they've kept trade unions banned, and have not really allowed a new class of leadership to emerge. So if we're talking about deepening democracy in Pakistan, I think it's also about holding these parties to account and asking them to make available institutions for ordinary people, working class people, to be able to participate in the democratic process.
And this, in a sense, connects with what you were saying actually about the economy. It's hard to institute the change, the truly effective change that is needed. Especially since many feel Pakistan is almost held hostage. That might sound like an exaggeration, but held hostage to the IMF and to the money that's owed and that is constantly borrowed because of corruption and because of this entrenched system in Pakistani politics. Do you see the rays of hope in how Mudassir was explaining the democracy has developed, it has become slightly more open? Does that make you feel going forward that things can improve, particularly on the economic level, which is where people are struggling the most in Pakistan? Does it give you hope things can really change?
Apart from all the facts that you mentioned, one of the reasons Pakistan was not able to, any government was not able to consistently complete these IMF programs was due to political compulsions, because the moment they wanted to take tough decisions, the opposition of that time they started giving them tough time, and they had to go back. And Pakistan is classified as one tranche nation in IMF, that we just get one tranche and then we go back from all of the commitments. But the positive development that happened during this year, that all the mainstream parties, People's Party, PMLN and PTI, they are on record saying that if they are allowed to form the government, they will not be shying away from going to the IMF. In the past, one of the major jargon in the electoral campaign was that we will break the shackles of IMF, and no way we will go to IMF. But now all three parties, they understand it, that IMF is the lifeline right now. And if a country has to pay $25 billion every year to IMF for the next 3 years, and without engaging with the IMF, that loan cannot be paid.
Right.
So I think whoever is coming to govern, they know that on economy, they will have to take some tough decisions. They would have to sort of take other political parties along when they would be doing some macroeconomic adjustments. And in Turkey, you are already feeling the brunt of those macroeconomic adjustments. They are tough. both on people as well as on the government. So the government would have to take the political parties along. A single political party or a single coalition government will not be able to do it without help of opposition.
I'm going to stick with you for a minute, because if you talk about who's going to be making these decisions on the economy, and we still had bold predictions that Nawaz Sharif would take over. Now, he is, if I can put it bluntly, the ultimate capitalist. He's one of the richest men in Pakistan. Do you think that's what Pakistan needs, especially given poverty rates at, 30% is a mild estimate? People living far below the poverty line. Do you think a man like Nawaz Sharif is the person that can pull the economy out of this, but also not increase poverty through austerity?
As I said, that going to IMF would mean to do some structural adjustments to revive or sell the loss-making public sector enterprises, not to subsidize energy, only focusing on targeted subsidies, and bringing some of the non-tax sectors in tax net, and I'm referring to the real estate developers and the retail sector, etc. Now, if the government will not do it, even if it's Nawaz Sharif, if it will not do it, it means that next IMF program is not going to come. And if next IMF program is not going to come, in June 2024, we will be in the same position as we were in June 2023. With less than 2 weeks of imports forex exchange and standing on the verge of default. So I don't see any option left with the next government, whoever will come in government, not to take this decision. Otherwise, God forbid, perhaps they can save their politics, but they will not be able to save economy and the plight of 240 million people.
Are you worried about where this economy is going?
Well, I think we need political certainty, political stability for the economic growth and development. And this is one of the major reasons, and I think Sulhari Saab is an economist, and he may or may not agree that the total upheaval over the last 2 years has not allowed the economy to breathe. And at least with elections comes a certain certainty. Maybe there would be protests, maybe the parties won't agree to the outcome, but at least there would be a certainty that there's a government elected. The quality of polls may be challenged, they always have been challenged. But at least there will be political certainty about a government in place for 5 years. They will have a cushion and comfort to make policies that can sustain. Parliament would be in place, and the government will have the legitimacy of the elections. So I think that would allow economy to at least breathe and come out from the rough waters that it has been in.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, all this can be done if a functional government is formed. I would love to really know how this is going to proceed, since it's very unclear right now who will actually come to power and have to form a coalition. But Amar, you've actually said Pakistan has not seen a situation this bad and been in more need of better leadership since the 1970s. How so?
I mean, Pakistan has obviously had a very checkered history in terms of electoral manipulation, and often parties are brought into power at the behest of the establishment. There's obviously similar allegations that were leveled against PTI back in 2018 when they swept into power on the back of a similar sort of effort to what the PMLN is experiencing right now. At the same time, what we've seen this year is also an attempt to dismantle an entire political party. I mean, you could argue that opponents will bring up that they brought this on themselves because of the May 9th attacks against military installations and residences. And I mean, I don't think it would be unreasonable to argue that people involved in that should be prosecuted according to the law. But what we've seen beyond that is an attempt to take that party apart, force its leadership to resign or quit politics, taking away of its symbol. Even right now, there's thousands of party workers arrested. The internet has been shut down several times. Social media has been shut down at multiple points this election. And today, the step of shutting down cellular services for the entire country, I mean, this is something I've been observing elections since 2008, and I've never seen anything like this. And I doubt you'll find many instances like this around the world. And I mean, as a young person who wants to see this country progress and prosper and obviously solve some of the many crippling economic challenges that we face, again, you need a government that has legitimacy. Mm-hmm. You need a government that commands the support of a majority of the public.
And do you think they'll get, I mean, you need someone that is going to be able to kind of break this endless cycle of politicians and then the military kind of seeking revenge, mm-hmm. Jailing opponents, cracking down on whatever opposition they think is not going to work in their best interest, mm-hmm. Wasting, parliaments, and then co-opting the judiciary mm-hmm. into the same political mess. Do you see anyone or any chance of any institution being able to break this cycle?
I mean, I think this cycle will eventually break when the people of Pakistan really decide that what they want is a constitutional democracy, that they want to be able to elect the leadership of their own choice, that there shouldn't be closed-door meetings that determine electoral outcomes in this country. And I mean, and that's a really long battle. And I think this year, the election results might give us a sense of how much the Pakistani public repudiates these attempts to manipulate electoral outcomes. But it's still very hard to muster any hope because if, again, even after this vote, if a weak coalition government is cobbled together simply based on what the state requires, Pakistan has debt repayments, massive $24 billion of debt repayments due in June. You will need a government that is able to take the hard decisions that are necessary. And obviously there's going to be questions about who is really going to run the economic decision making of the country right now. If Nawaz Sharif does come into power, there's also a special investment facilitation council established by law for the military. So I mean, there will be questions of not just within the political arena, but also within the civil military.
Mudassir, let me just get your final thoughts then.
Well, I think the most important thing is when the political parties decide to strengthen the Pakistani parliament. The IMF that we have been discussing, the NI agreement with the IMF seals my fate and seals my household budget, but it's not agreed, discussed, approved by the parliament. So parliament needs to be strengthened. Judges are appointed by the parliament, cannot be impeached by the parliament. Election commissioners are appointed by the parliament, cannot be impeached by the parliament. So parliament needs to be strengthened. The civilian supremacy needs to be translated in its truest bit, and only then Pakistani democracy can flourish. Only then the institutions can be accountable to the parliament and the people.
Okay. Uphill struggle. I am so sorry for not giving you a final word here, but unfortunately we are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.